The hush before sunrise lingered over King's Landing like a final held breath, as though the city itself sensed that dawn would birth a world it no longer recognized. Low fog stitched the alleyways between crumbling manses, and torches along the ramparts guttered in the chill off Blackwater Bay. Within the Red Keep, Sansa Stark stood alone in the Queen's solar, steady hands prying open the last of the small ebony jars Maester Colbron had ferried from Old Town. Powder the color of pale ash sifted onto a strip of vellum beneath her gaze, an undistinguished wisp that would change the living memory of Westeros. She closed the jar and crushed the vellum until the grains vanished between her gloved fingers. One slow inhalation, a subtle tilt of her head, and a soft smile ghosted her mouth. Ash looked so innocuous. But ash came from fire. Ash came from kingdoms turned to soot when spies whispered quicker than ravens. The Maester's sleeping draught, odorless, flawless, worked in skin and lung alike. A cupbearer's sleeve, a pie-maker's crust, an unsuspecting steward dusting drapes in a lord's guest suite. Anything could scatter that fine residue. A hush fell again, deeper, like the last heartbeat before the knife slid in. Outside, bells tolled morning. They did not toll for a coronation, never for such triumph. The realm's lords had assembled in the throne room, under pretense of resolving another fragile peace. Baratheon envoys, Greyjoy reavers, in salt-stiffed leathers, proud Tully kin from River Run, one Lannister cousin whose gold brooch gleamed like an apology for the empty seat where his house once dominated. Quietly, almost politely, they had come to bargain for lands and titles. They would leave with nothing but failure etched on cold faces. Sansa tugged her gloves tighter, feeling the subtle weight of acid-proof buckles against her wrists, one precaution among dozens. She no longer trusted fate to mercy. Mercy in Westeros devoured the merciful. Her every breath rehearsed a litany learned in darkness. Broken promises rebuild walls. Justice without caution is self-ruin. And always, always, wolves that stand alone dine on the world. Footsteps came, purposeful but soft. Podrick Payne, taller now, scar cut across his jawline from the Riverlands uprising. "My queen," he greeted, voice hoarse from too many nights reciting vows to empty corridors. He no longer stumbled over honorifics. None who served Sansa did. She turned, porcelain composure masking the twinge in her heart. Pod, who once sang bawdy tavern songs with Brienne, now wore burdens heavier than Kingsguard plate. "Is it done?" she asked. No title, no warmth. Distance shielded them both. He inclined his head. "Lord Jon Royce holds the Eyrie in your name. The Vale banners will not ride south." Good. Fewer blades in the capital meant fewer corpses to bury later. Once she might have trusted the Arryn bannermen implicitly. But she had scrawled too many letters with invisible ink, felt too many daggers stare from banquet shadows. No house, not even one sworn to her blood, could remain untested. She strode toward the window, watching gulls wheel above the bay. The dragon pit stands sealed. From floor to roof, not even a swallow could roost there. Let it remain so until the stones crumble. She tasted the word dragon. Long had Balerian's skull glared from crypt vaults below, an ancient reminder that realms break beneath wing and fire. Dragons, houses, kings, all fell in time. Thunder rolled west, though no storm flew across the pale sky. Cersei once claimed that in King's Landing thunder meant gods arguing over mortals. Sansa knew better. Cannon bursts echoed from the harbor, salutes from the royal fleet marking the Lord's assembly. Even pageantry bore her seal now. She turned to Podrick. "Escort me." They crossed corridors where Tyrell roses still curled in faded tapestries, petals brown as dried blood. She let her fingers graze a frayed edge, thinking of Margaery's laughter. Floral, heady, hungry, and of wildfire flames licking dragonstone green, spiraling into black headlines of smoke across a war-torn skyline. One memory among thousands. Each carving of marble along the vaulted halls whispered of ghosts. Before the squared oak doors to the throne room, the Queen's Guard flanked in austere gray, wolf's head sigils in polished steel. Their captain, Ser Brienne of Tarth, broad-shouldered in pale plate, eyes remote, met Sansa's gaze. "All is secured," she said. Here was the only soul Sansa allowed inside her final defenses, though even Brienne felt the distance winter forged. The knight's loyalty was incontrovertible. Loyalty, Sansa had learned, could remain pure if kept apart from warmth. Sansa nodded and stepped past. The doors groaned aside like leviathans refusing death. Inside, sunlit shards spilled through shattered stained glass high above, casting distorted wraiths of color across marble floors. Scorched pillars bore gouges from Aegon's wars and Daenerys' vengeance. The Iron Throne, hideous mosaic of melted blades, stood sentinel. Beneath its looming shadow, the lords argued in tight knots. Their voices rose like angry crows, until the clatter of doors reverberated. Silence gripped them as the Queen of the North now donned ash-gray velvet and silent threat. She advanced, heels tapping deliberate plurals of defiance. Every step counted. 1 for Winterfell's fires, 2 for a father betrayed, 3 for a mother's scream at the twins, 4 for a brother's hacked crown, 5 for a sister's stolen childhood. She paused precisely 5 paces from the throne, jubilation tempered with iron resolve. The lords' faces played uneasy refrains. Suspicion, pride, greed, disguised terror. She read them like strings of verses. Lannister arrogance, doused yet smoldering. Greyjoy insolence itching for plunder. Baratheon impatience, disguised as rumbling courtesy. Lord Gendry Baratheon spoke first, broad shoulders set as though the throne itself weighed upon him. Once a smith, still earnest. "Your Grace," he began, the assembled houses. "My friends," Sansa interrupted, voice smooth but frost-hard. "Westeros no longer bleeds for your ambitions. We gather to end what generations could not." Murmurs rippled. She felt rather than saw the maester at the tiers loosen a pouch. Saw a serving boy adjust a flagon above the benches. Glimpsed dust floating invisible in a slanted sunbeam. Time slowed to a wolf's stalking hush. Lord Edmure Tully, her uncle, frowned. "If we speak of reparations, Riverland's soil needs—" "We will speak," she assured. "But not of coin, not of titles." She lifted a hand. Brienne stepped forward, sword drawn, not in menace, a ritual signal. The Queen's Guard lined the dais, sealing exits save the grand door behind them. Lords straightened warily, weight shifting to booted heels. Sansa's eyes, no longer summer blue but winter ice, swept the hall. For centuries, great houses quarreled like gods. Each sowed war to reap power, and the small folk tilled graves. We proclaim honor, yet trade children for alliances. We preach divine right, yet starve chapels, while feasting halls burst at the seams. Enough. Her voice scarcely rose, yet carried to every stone. She moved toward the throne's base, did not ascend. "The 7 kingdoms will lose their shackles today. Great houses, as you style yourselves, are finished." Silence deepened, incredulous, then outraged as thunder pealed inside mortal chests. Lord Jason Lannister burst first, preposterous. "Without the houses, chaos." "Chaos has ruled your banners long enough," Sansa said. "Tonight you will sign a charter of commonship. Noble birth will grant no right above any swineherd." Greyjoy laughter cracked like breaking bone. Asha Greyjoy lounged against a column, arms folded. "And who enforces your pretty charter? Northman claws?" "Justice," Sansa replied, "wields more than claws." She lifted 2 fingers. A side door opened. The city's guildmasters entered, stewards, healers, blacksmiths, scribes, harbor masters, ranks of common-born men and women clad in dark blue cloaks, embroidered with pale northern wolfsbane. Behind them stepped silent, unsullied phalanxes, no banners now, only discipline honed beyond pride. Sansa faced the lords. "Your armies weary, your coffers thin. My alliances do not bleed coin, they breathe oath." Lord Gendry's brow knitted. "But bloodlines will wane," she finished. "Let the Baratheon name survive as legend, not burden. Let the Iron Islands remember their drowned kings in saga, not tax. You may keep your memories, you will not keep power." Gasps swept the hall as the guildmasters unfurled scrolls. Edicts drafted in a language free of ancient precedents. Literacy for all children. Land divided into stewardships where those who worked fields owned them. Taxes bound to transparent ledgers. King's Guard replaced by a civic watch elected each decade. And at the Charter's summit, one stark line. The Iron Throne stands until the realm elects its steward. Even Podrick's breath jolted behind her. The throne remained, for now. She would sit, not as Queen Eternal, but as steward of the transition. She might rule a decade, maybe two, but her own children, if ever she trusted herself enough to birth them, would inherit nothing but a family cottage in the snows of Winterfell. Lord Larys Strong, miraculously still breathing after many regimes, bowed slightly. Ambitious. His crooked smile held sly calculation. No doubt he weighed profits in a houseless world. Sansa met his gaze evenly. Ambition has forged every crown. Let it now forge freedom. The Lannister cousin drew steel. No sooner had the rasp sung than Brienne's broadsword split the air, knocking the blade from his grip. Metal skittered across marble like a startled wren. Sansa's voice mellowed to near tenderness. Violence will not serve you today. This hall is sealed. The powder you inhaled while you boasted over roasted boar will soften your limbs within minutes. Struggle and breath leaves quicker. Lords pressed trembling fingers to throats. Sudden understanding lighting terrified eyes. Greyjoy's swagger faltered. Baratheon bulk shifted uncertainly. She continued, calm as snowfall. You hold a choice. Sign the charter and shepherd your people toward a peace none of your lineages could birth, or resist and vanish into the wheel of rumor. One more house that choked on its own hubris. Lord Edmure's face softened with something near relief. He reached for a quill upon the dais. His hand shook. Not from poison but from realization that tradition shackled him heavier than chains. The quill scratched parchment. A signature. Tully scrawl became the first stone in a new keep. Gendry's eyes burned with question. Of friendship, of betrayal, but he too lifted the quill. Stormland's thunder condensed into one inked stroke. Asha Greyjoy shrugged, roped muscles flexing as she pressed her mark. One by one the rest followed. Even Jason Lannister, lips white, scrawled with trembling fury. Sansa listened to the music of scratching quills, hearts racing, hopes recalibrating. Somewhere deep inside the child she had been, the girl who stitched flowers on satin and dreamed of songs, whispered that she should weep for what she destroyed. She buried that child beneath winter earth. When the last flourish dried, Sansa signaled Brienne. The night presented an iron key, small, heavy, fashioned from a melted dagger once used to cut a stark throat. Sansa accepted it and turned to the throne. Without flourish, she climbed its jagged steps. Blades hissed beneath her skirts, but she knew every jutting edge. She had walked nightly in her mind among them. Seated, she looked down, the hall now hers completely. Return to your keeps, she ordered. Inform your bannermen. Within a fortnight, each great seat shall host elections for civic councils. Gather your scribes. Your knowledge will guide your towns through this dawn, but wield it as teachers, not tyrants. The treasury will fund ministries of roads, aqueducts, winter stores. The maester's chain shall extend to any child who wishes to learn letters. Those who resist these decrees will be met by the civic watch and the unsullied. She paused, surveying them like a sculptor eyeing flawed marble. I did not slay your houses. Your histories did. Live beyond them. The gathering dispersed on unsteady legs, shepherded by guildmasters. Podrick closed the doors behind the last straggler. Quiet returned, not hollow, but resonant. Brienne ascended the dais, helm tucked beneath her arm. It's done, she murmured, as though disbelieving. For now, Sansa answered. But winter storms linger even after thaw. She rose again. The throne would never become her anchor. Send ravens north. Winterfell must prepare for refugees and lords stripped of privilege. Podrick shifted step. Will they come willingly? They will come because hope tastes better than ashes. She glanced to the maester's empty jar. And if not, they will choke on the dust they raised themselves. Her feet carried her toward the dim corridor beyond the throne room, each stride lighter than the last, though burden remained colossal. Brienne walked at her side, Podrick trailing. They passed a high window cut toward the harbor. Morning fog had burned away, revealing gulls diving in bright arcs above water, flecked with gold. Sansa halted. Below, the city stirred. Fishmongers shouting prices, sailors hammering masts, children chasing stray dogs along salt-sprayed quays. Life echoed stronger than any bell or blade. She pressed a palm to cold stone. "Do you think they will forgive me?" she asked, voice so low it almost vanished. Brienne answered first, tone firm. "They will thank you, in time. And those who never learn to." Podrick stepped forward, conviction firm in his scarred face. "You taught them choice, my queen. Whether they love or hate you is theirs." Sansa closed her eyes. Choice. The word felt like warm bread after famine. She had given it away once in childish folly. Let Joffrey rewrite destiny with a sneer. Now, she claimed it back for a kingdom. But the final ledger still tallied names she could never resurrect, peace she could never fully promise. A gust tugged her auburn hair loose. She breathed deep, as though inhaling every cry of the port, every whisper of the red keeps ghosts. Then she pivoted, charcoal skirts fanning like ravens' wings, and started toward the Tower of the Hand, her new seat for labor far removed from ostentation. Royal apartments, with their crimson hangings and perfumed floors, would grow dusty. She preferred quills, ledgers, and maps. Days blurred into weeks. Caravans departed the capital bearing lords to their diminished keeps, each clutching a charter copy. Sansa's decree traveled swifter than any army. By raven, sung by traveling mummers, whispered by innkeeps who read charters, aloud to illiterate patrons. Some scoffed, others prayed. In Old Town, the archmaesters convened emergency conclave. In White Harbor, fishwives cheered and pelted retiring mannerly scions with gutted cod. Resistance rose, of course. Lord Clay Serwyn refused to cede ancestral rights. He vanished when the Civic Watch arrived. Rumors said he lived as a pig farmer under assumed name. Cracklaw Point's cadastral lines erupted in border feuds. Sansa dispatched up by a single unsullied cohort, and feuds ceased. The most violent spark came from High Garden, where scattered Tyrell loyalists crowned a distant cousin king amid blooming orchards. Their banners burned within a fortnight. The cousin accepted exile across narrow sea rather than push daisies with his vassals. Throughout, Sansa penned letters daily. To harbor masters about grain tariffs, to furriers about equitable wages, to rural aldermen about seed stores before winter. Her syllables laid mortar for a civilization unimagined. Necks accustomed to bending before golden lions or crowned stag shed that reflex slowly, but they shed it. Children recited alphabets in village squares. Smithies hammered plowshares more often than swords. A septon in Duskendale married a blacksmith to a former lady without a single sneer. Season cycled. 3 harvests colored the realm in flaxen gold. During the third, Sansa traveled beyond King's Landing for the first time since her coronation. Without retinue or pageant, only Brienne, Pod, and a pocket of guards cloaked plainly. She journeyed north along King's Road to witness the change up close. They reached Harrenhal under slate clouds. The ruin loomed monstrous, its melted towers weeping black stains. Yet inside, she found the once cursed castle hosting cooperative for potters and weavers. In the Godswood, children pranced under burnt arches, chasing dragonflies that glimmered like shards of colored glass. An old woman curtsied before Sansa, tears bright in crow-footed corners. "My lady," the woman rasped. "The children eat every night." Sansa pressed a coin into her hand, new mint, stamped with a direwolf circled by grain stalks. "Their laughter is worth more than gold." In River Run, she met Edmure again, hair white but eyes content. He guided her along floodbanks fortified by communal labor. No tenant starved in 2 winters. He gifted her carved trout of weirwood. She embraced him for the first time in years. At the Twins, she bowed head beside stones marking Robb and Catelyn's memory. Frey banners were long gone. Ferrymen's guilds now kept the crossings. A lad of 8 offered her a reed flute he'd whittled. She accepted with a smile, though it stung. When she reached Winterfell, dusk lay lavender over snow-dusted ramparts. The heart trees' red leaves trembled in wind that smelled of pine and cold truth. She walked alone beneath branches stained crimson like old grief. Her gloved fingers brushed smooth bark scarred by weather and war. "Killed no kings today," she murmured. "Is that penance enough?" The face in the heart tree did not answer. But ravens rustled overhead, feathers whispering the language of long winters. "We endure." In the great hall, hearths roared. Small folk gathered long trestles to feast upon venison and honeyed oatcakes. Sansa entered quietly, dressed in simple wool, and no horns blared, no herald announced. Yet one by one they rose, not to kneel but to raise cups. An elder woman, lines deep as moltings in snow, lifted her mug. "To the wolf who broke our chains," she said. "May she run free as us." Sansa felt tears threaten, but allowed none to fall. Instead, she raised her own cup of watered ale. "To all who build the dawn," she answered. They drank. Laughter mingled with crackle of logs and smell of roasted apples. Bran, the last sibling she might trust with her soul, arrived in wheeled chair from crypt corridor. His eyes, ever distant, sparked faint warmth. "Did you see all this?" she asked him softly on the balcony later, as snowflakes drifted onto her hair. "I saw what could be," he replied. "Paths are choices. You chose." She sighed, letting the frost kiss her lips. "I lost so much." "You gave more," he said. "The realm breathes." She turned to him, searching ancient depths behind blue gaze. "Will it last?" "For a time," he answered. And that was more hope than destiny ever granted a Stark. They sat in silence until lanterns below snuffed out, leaving only aurora flicker across northern sky. Years wound onward like rivers, etching new valleys. Children born under Sansa's charter grew into artisans, historians, physicians. The last gossip of great houses edged into legend told by hearthlight, of proud lions humbled, of krakens sailing to trade rather than raid, of roses wilted but leaving seeds of art. The Iron Throne itself, once symbol of dominion, became relic in a museum of caution. Its fused swords dulled by time, its steps barred by velvet rope. Tour guides recited stories of mad kings and dragon queens. School children gasped yet did not bow. In a modest townhouse overlooking the restored dragon pit garden, now an aviary for ravens and snow owls, Sansa spent twilight years writing annals. Ink stained her fingers dark as northern cliffs. Quills wore to nubs in candlelight. She titled her work neither memoir nor history, but Seeds of Winter's Spring. In those pages, she laid bare each decision. The ash-dust draft, the charter, the nights she woke weeping for innocence, she had slit herself. She wrote of Brienne's unwavering guard, of Podrick's steadfast singing to keep ghosts at bay, of the moment Gendry forgave her not with words but with a blacksmith's gift, a perfectly balanced knife meant for harvest, not murder. On the day snowfall returned to King's Landing, a soft dusting that melted on warm stone, Sansa set down her quill for the final time. Brienne, hair silvered, stood beside her, gaze steady as the first day in the throne room. "You're certain?" the knight asked quietly. "Yes." Sansa rose, joints creaking like old shutters. "Let my chair pass to council. It's theirs." Podrick entered carrying a bundle. He unfurled a cloak of thick wolf fur lined in linen. "A gift from Winterfell," he said. "They ask you to visit once more." Sansa stroked the fur, remembering cold nights under weirwood branches. "I will ride north," she decided. "No retinue, no titles." Brienne smiled. "Old roads remember you." She left at dawn unceremoniously. Only Brian and Podrick escorted her to the gate. The civic watch saluted. Common folk bowed from market stalls. Children chased her pony's shadow. She rode until the city dwindled to silhouette, until horizon swallowed spires. On a slope near the Blackwater Rush, she halted, turning once. King's Landing gleamed under pale sun, roofs bright as hammered copper. Smoke no longer stained its sky. Bells chimed, light and distant, unburdened by fear. She whispered farewell, though she would return someday a simple pilgrim. Ahead waited winter forests, looping calls, hearths built not for queens but for kin. She spurred her horse. Snow began to fall in earnest, swirling like ash reversed into purity. Each flake landed on her cloak, dissolving warmth rather than coldness, promising that endings sprout bud green beginnings when tended by patient hands. The wind carried faint voices, echoes of houses once proud, fading behind her hoofbeats. Sansa Stark rode into snow that erased tracks almost as soon as they formed, yet somewhere deep beneath, seeds stirred, roots thickened, and a realm, houseless, throneless, freer than any singer's ballad, grew bright as spring green beneath the white. Snow shivered off the pine boughs and drifted across the King's Road in thin veils, glittering in the low winter sun. Sansa guided her mare around a frozen rut, felt the pony's breath plume white, then glanced back. Brienne rode a length behind, every inch of her tall frame wrapped in boiled leather and furs, visor up so she could watch the tree line. Podrick, sturdy and silent, brought up the rear with 2 pack horses, their hooves crunching the crusted drifts. It had been decades since the road was a danger worth fretting over. No reaving banners, no tax collectors posted at makeshift checkpoints. But old habits clung to Brienne like plate. Sansa let the vigilance comfort her, the same way she had once taken comfort in Mother's fingers, smoothing a tangle from her hair. They camped that night, beneath a collapsed stone marker half hidden under frost. Long ago it proclaimed distances to Winterfell and Moat Cailin, but the lettering had been scoured smooth by wind and time, until only a faint swirl of the direwolf remained. Podrick built a low fire in the lee of the broken slab, stacking pine cones and dead branches. Sparks flurried upward, orange against deepening purple sky. When the water in their kettle began to burble, Brienne eased herself to the ground with an old soldier's hiss and produced a cured ham strip they had bought at Maidenpool. She sliced it in silence. Sansa watched the blade rise and fall, measured, unhurried. "Thank you," she said at last. Brienne's brow furrowed. "For what, my queen?" There was no court here, only wind and firelight, yet the title clung as stubbornly as snow to bark. "For staying." Brienne paused, knife hovering above wood. She looked to Sansa, then to the sky where scatterings of stars kindled. "I made an oath, long before oaths became fashion." Her voice was softer than the steel she carried, but no less unbendable. "I'd see it kept whatever crown the realm wears." After they ate, Podrick produced a battered lute missing 2 strings, and began to coax a tune from the remaining 5 toro. His fingers, gnarled from years of sword drills, plucked slowly, carefully, and a lilting winter town melody drifted between the trees. Sansa leaned back against her rolled cloak, letting the song stitch itself through her bones, feeling aches she had not known she carried loosen. Memory ghosted across the music, dancing in the great hall when she was 9, Arya chasing the cat beneath tables, father smiling over a goblet never drained too deep. The notes fluttered, circling like moths. She closed her eyes. When she woke, dawn bled pale, gold behind a thicket of black limbs. Brienne was already saddled, Pod tying the last strap. They set out before the sky brightened, crunching past frozen streams and quiet hamlets, where smoke curled from sod roofs. Children waved from doorways. Sansa answered each wave, though she doubted anyone recognized the fur-cloaked traveler as the architect of their schools and mills. That anonymity warmed her more than the cloak. They reached White Harbor on the 5th day. The mighty outer wall, patched and whitened by sea spray, loomed silent, but inside, the city thrummed like a hive, even in winter's choke. Cranes swung logs along newly widened piers. Shipwrights hammered fresh keels for fishing smacks and trade cogs bound for pentos. The harbor bell clanged above gull cries. Sansa reined in at the foot of the Manderley fountain, carved now not with fat merlings, but with intertwining grain sheaves and leaping trout to honor the cooperative that managed every ship's catch. Men in coarse wool bustled past, carrying crates of smoked haddock, none pausing to bow. That omission coaxed a pleased curve to Sansa's mouth. A scar-cheeked woman in watch blue strode forward. "Travel papers?" Brienne shifted as if to announce them, But Sansa touched her gauntlet lightly. 3 pilgrims for Winterfell, she said. Her accent carried the low croon of winter rivers, nothing regal. The watchwoman scanned their plain seals, burned sigils of the civic council every traveler now bore, then tipped her cap. Mind the east quarter, ma'am, pavers are slick. She waved them on, already shouting orders at a barge crew. Brienne fell in beside Sansa as they wound toward the new market. You're certain no one need know you're here? I need to see what we built with clear eyes, Sansa replied. If trumpets blare, the scene bends to please them. Podrick grinned under frost-rimmed lashes. Then we'll bend no scenes. He guided the pack horses behind a wheelwright cart, humming. They left White Harbor by dusk. The King's Road north of the Neck had shrunk over years to a modest but well-kept lane, resurfaced by local stonemasons each autumn with levy funds. The council distributed. Travelers camped safely within view of one another. When Sansa's party made their own fire, a family of wool merchants offered blackberry cordial and news of the river thaw in exchange for tales of the capital. Podrick played his lute. The merchant's 2 daughters listened wide-eyed as he sang of Princess Nymeria's voyage, never realizing they shared hearth with the very woman who had rewritten their world more drastically than Nymeria's 1,000 ships. On the 10th dawn, Winterfell's watchtower speared above the pines. Sansa sat rigid a moment, staring at stones she'd traced in dreams. Steam plumed from the hosts of hot springs, turning the air to soft mist. Ravens wheeled against the cold blue sky. She exhaled, felt her heart clatter behind ribs. The drawbridge had been replaced by a broad arch of granite. The People's Gate, Pod whispered, wide enough for 5 wagons. 2 watchmen greeted them with polite nods, then ushered them through into the bailey humming with craftsmen. Sansa inhaled smells of boiled wool, marrow broth, crisp pine, and horses. A large kennel of shaggy hounds bayed at their arrival. One pup slipped its handler, bolted forward, and planted muddy paws on Sansa's skirts before anyone could shout. She laughed as it yipped triumphantly, and the sound startled even her. A woman hurried from the stable's side door, wiping hands on a leather apron. Dark red hair twisted up in a bun, cheeks nipped pink by wind. Clyra Risewell, longtime kennel master, and now chair of Winterfell's civic circle. Recognition sparked the moment she saw Sansa, and she nearly bent knee, then caught herself, straightened into a crisp bow of citizens' respect. My lady. Habit. She cleared her throat. Apologies. Madam Stark, welcome home. Sansa took her offered forearm in the egalitarian clasp that had replaced court curtsies. Thank you, Clyra. Have Raven spoken ahead of me? Only that a traveler approached. Clyra's smile glinted. The council's in morning session. They will be gratified. Sansa handed over her mare. And you, satisfied? Clyra's eyes flicked to the kennel, and a grin tugged one corner of her mouth. Pups thrive. Fewer wars mean more hounds for hunts that are sport, not survival. By the time Brienne and Pod saw to the horses and unpacked, word had reached the council chamber. Sansa entered with minimal fanfare, but the 20-odd members, smiths, scribes, tanners, mill hands, rose instinctively. They did not kneel. Instead, each placed fist over heart in the salute of equal pledge. Sansa mirrored them. She saw no noble's colors, no gilded doublets. The highest decoration in the room was a master potter's lapel badge carved from birch. Rowan Snow, the council speaker, stepped forward. Bastard born of some long-forgotten steward, he wore the telling white streak through sable hair, but had earned the role by deft negotiation of grain tariffs with the Vale. He presented her with Winterfell's current ledger. Surplus stores for 2 years, hospital wing expansion plans, a petition for a new glassworks. Sansa scanned the pages while the council resumed debate. They spoke swiftly, comfortably, dissenting in measured turns, a choreography of discourse unimaginable when lords fenced insults. She added a note in the margin of the glassworks proposal: craft apprenticeships for orphan girls of Deepwood, then slid the ledger back to Rowan. As she did, the great hall's northern doors burst open, and a gust of snow-flecked wind harried a tall, gaunt figure inside. Arya Stark, though few called her Stark anymore, strode the aisle in doveskin and wolf-head cloak, hair silver at the temples, steel at her hip. She paused when she saw Sansa, and something thawed behind the flint of her gaze. Without word she crossed the space, seized Sansa by the arm, and pulled her into a rough embrace that smelled of saddle leather and pine sap. Council members watched in hushed fascination. Arya's name echoed through ballad and rumor, more shadow than flesh. The wandering wolf who mapped coastlines beyond Ibn, and toppled a Braavosi slaver state with 3 blades and a dozen whispered names. Legends rarely walk through meeting doors. Back from the edge of the world, Sansa murmured against Arya's collar. "Just in time," Arya answered, her voice lower and harsher than Sansa remembered. "I bring news. Trouble rides the narrow sea." They closed the council early. In the solar overlooking the godswood, Arya unfolded a salt-stained chart and planted a dagger at an unmarked cove east of the Fingers. 4 ships here, sloops shallow keel. No merchant flags rigged for speed. Crewmen speak Reach dialect, captained by a Tyrell bastard who named himself Lord of Flowers Reborn. Her lip curled, amused and disdainful. "Picked up whispers in Gulltown. He intends to gather sympathizers, spark banners under the old sigils again." Sansa traced the coastline on the map's margin. A last gasp. Arya shrugged. A gasp can still gut. Brienne's gauntlet thumped softly on the tabletop. "How many men?" 200 cutthroats at most. Arya's fingers danced along blade hilts, invisible in memory. "But if they land, they'll find malcontent ex-squires itching for old days." Sansa weighed silence. Revolt had been inevitable. Pockets of nostalgia festering among those who mistook status for self. Yet she had hoped they would confine their dreams to alehouse boasts. "How long until they make harbor?" she asked. 10 days, if waters hold," Arya said. Rowan Snow, summoned to join them, rolled his shoulders. "Winterfell's council can ready 200 volunteers. Not soldiers, farmers, craftsmen, but they know bows." Brienne frowned. "Volunteers cannot match sellsword steel head-on." "No," Sansa agreed. "But they needn't. We will show the rebellion has no soil left to root in." She paced to the window. Beneath, the godswood towered red and white, ancient witness. She had once thought decisive victories arrived on battlefields. She knew now they were sown in minds before swords left scabbards. "We send ravens," she said. "Not to raise arms. To call for open assemblies in every hamlet along the coast. Let the people decide whether these ships anchor." Podrick scratched his scar. "And if they decide poorly, then we learn where fear still lives," she answered. "But I have faith. The small folk have tasted autonomy. They will not trade it for rose-trimmed banners." Within hours, crows launched from Winterfell's rookery, black arrows spraying south. Sansa drafted the call herself, ink steady. "Neighbors, friends, workers of field and craft, sails approach that bear no trade, only claims of inherited dominion. Meet them with your voices before blood answers. Assemble as free folk and demand purpose of these would-be lords." Nan Sweistad. While ravens winged south, Sansa walked the castle she once prayed to leave. The kitchens bustled with apprentices from mountain clans learning sugar glazing. Stable hands from Bear Island practiced veterinary dosing on geldings. The library rang with debates over grain rotation treatises copied from the citadel. At dusk, she climbed the battlements. Cold bit her cheeks, but she welcomed the sting like proof of breath. Brienne joined her, silent. "Do you ever wish for quieter days?" Sansa asked, eyes on moonlit forests. Brienne shook her head. "The world was quiet once because it feared speaking. I prefer noise that harms no one." Sansa smiled. "So do I, though some nights the echoes keep me awake." Down in the courtyard, torches ringed a game of snow hoops played by children of steward, guard, and baker alike. Their shrieks of laughter spiraled upward against the stone. She closed her eyes and let it settle in her ears like lullaby. Days passed in weaving patterns of preparation and routine. Arya sparred in the yard with volunteer militias, correcting footwork with a tap of wooden sword. Brienne drilled shield walls of potters and shepherds, until their arms trembled, but their formations held. Rowan convened assemblies across river villages via scribe towers. Reports returned telling of fishwives tearing down faded rose banners before any sellswords arrived, of miners in the mountains of the moon forging chains across inlet mouths, of small septons preaching that the seven blessed those who tilled their own soil, not those who claimed it from birth. On the 8th evening, a raven beat frantic wings against the hall shutters. Podrick untied the message and read aloud. The Tyrell pretenders' ships had put into a nameless cove near Rook's Rest, finding harbors barred. Villagers met them with lanterns raised and asked their business. The sellswords pressed forward. One swung his sword at a lamplighter. Before he could land the blow, 24 shorehands tackled him, bound him with rope, and dragged the unconscious man into the surf where they doused him awake. The others retreated to their boats amid jeers of "Pay your berth fee," or "Be gone," the new rallying cry of coastal freefolk who regarded every dock as communal property. By dawn they had sailed, direction unknown but likely south, where easier marks might be found. Sansa exhaled a breath she hadn't known she held. There had been no bloodshed, merely the sturdiness of collective will. The kingdom had defended itself without swords drawn, just as she dreamed the day she sprinkled ash on vellum. Rowan grinned. Seems the realm has grown a backbone wider than any noble's shoulders. But Arya only shrugged, sheathing her knife. They'll keep trying. Anything dying does. Sansa nodded. So will we. Winter settled deep. At Winterfell schools, children etched letters onto birch bark before fires, while snowstorms muttered outside. In the smithies, apprentices shaped rivets and saw teeth, tools for spring planting. When the first thaws carved ribbons through the drifts, Sansa and Arya rode north to the wall of ice, now little more than an ancient scar. Eastwatch lay dormant, manned by volunteers who kept watch for trade galleys more than wildlings. Those free folk had long since mingled south and west, their clans weaving it into township quilt. Yet the wall had become a symbol worth tending. Sansa inspected its buttresses and signed orders to reinforce sections with dragon-glass cement, a gift from old Valeria's Smith Guild. No invader of fable approached, but neglect bred ruin faster than war. Days melted into one another, crisp, purposeful, fulfilling. At times Sansa's joints ached fiercely, and she leaned on Arya more than pride preferred. She felt the long years in marrow deeper than any frost. But between aches she discovered joys she'd never dared imagine. Tasting the first batch of berry-aged ale from the small brewery council sanctioned, listening to the blind harpist from Barroton compose a ballad of the Cooper's revolt, waking at night to the far-off sound of wool ivy beyond the meadow and realizing it no longer triggered fear or grief. Wolves were not omens now. They were simply wolves. Brienne remained near, sentinel and friend. She'd taken to mentoring a trio of bright-eyed girls in sword forms. Sansa watched one lesson, noting how gently yet firmly Brienne corrected stances, eliminating the room for errors Sansa once lived in. The smallest girl, Maria Holt, swung too wide and lost her balance. Brienne caught her elbow and steadied her. "Strength is recognizing misstep," she murmured to the child. Those words echoed later when Sansa lay sleepless beneath white bear fur. Strength in missteps? That notion would have seemed contradiction once, back when every court slip cost reputation and every misjudgment a life. Yet had any of this dawn been possible without her own missteps? She turned the thought like a hot stone that warmed hands even as it burned. Without believing Joffrey's lies, she might never have fled, never learned Cersei's cruelty. Without trusting Littlefinger too long, she might never have grasped deceit's anatomy. Without walking countless edges, how could she have known where cliff finished and sky began? Some weeks after the foiled Tyrell risings, word arrived of revolt in the Summer Islands, unrelated to Westeros, but a reminder that oppression found fresh forms. Sansa summoned the Archmaesters to Winterfell, proposed a practice of dispatching volunteer medics and advocates abroad when such injustice flared, a brotherhood of needles and quills. Arya snorted at the name, but offered to train the field operatives, and thus the earliest seeds of the Free Mercy Corps took root. One still night, with dawn birds just chattering, Podrick climbed to the north side parapet where Sansa sipped tea. He carried a sheet, wrapped in oilskin. "Harper Kelleth finished the score," he said, eyes bright. A ballad to mark the charter's 10th year. He offered the parchment. Sansa unrolled it, scanned looping staves. She could not read music, yet the neat rows of notes looked like stepped petals. She pictured minstrels playing this in market squares, children humming it while mending nets. "Play it," she said. Podrick hesitated. "Here. I'll wake half the keep." "Let them wake," she said with a soft challenge. "No tyrant threatens their dreams." He smiled, still the shy squire behind scar lines, and lifted his lute. Fingers brushed strings, summoning melody delicate as frost flowers on a window pane. The tune rose, circled towers, drifted into pine crowns. Sansa watched dawn slip across sky like melted gold. She felt tears gather, not sorrowful but full, a cup brimming against the lip. When the song ended, footfalls sounded behind them. Arya leaned on the stone, chin propped on arm, eyes soft. "That was nice," she said. "I've heard worse in Bravos, sometimes while gagged in a cellar." Sansa huffed a laugh. "Your presence alone just turned every note a touch sharper." Brienne joined, blanket over mail. "Play again," she asked, surprising them all. Podrick struck the opening chord once more, and this time Sansa sang quietly, words improvised. "Of rivers freed, of mills run by hands unbroken, of a wolf who taught the realm to stand." Her voice cracked, but neither Brienne nor Arya winced. In that quiet hour, imperfection was a kind of prayer. The second spring after her return, life along the White Knife exploded in green. Birch leaves unfurled, lands bleated, and a traveling tinker arrived bearing a letter sealed with a black iron stud, rare mark of the Associ Concord. The letter invited Sansa to speak at the first international forum in Lys on governance beyond monarchy. Her knees shuddered at the notion of months aboard ship, yet the honor shimmered like fresh snow. Still, in her gut, she sensed the road ahead for her was shortening, not lengthening. She summoned Rowan, Arya, Brienne, and Podrick to her solar, spread the letter before them. "I will not sail," she said. Her hands lay flat on the parchment, feeling the lines of ink through paper. "But we will answer." Rowan's brow rose. "Whom shall we send?" Sansa turned to Podrick. A blush chased the scar on his cheek. "May," he sputtered. "I'm half deaf in crowds, and have stronger diplomacy than half the realm," she finished. Brienne nodded. "He knows the charter's route, played every hall from Old Town to the Dreadfort." Arya clapped him on the back hard enough to stagger a lesser man. "He had plenty of oranges aboard. Lys sluts its sailors with sweet wine. You'll need your voice." Podrick gulped but squared his shoulders. "I'll do my best." Sansa sealed the decision with wax, impressed by her direwolf grain sigil. Days later, the courtsmith forged a modest silver brooch, shaped like an open book over crossed hammers, the emblem of the realm's civic creed, to pin at Podrick's collar on foreign soil. Sansa herself fastened it the morning he rode south, stepping onto her toes to reach his broad chest. She felt a rush of maternal pride, strange and tender. After their farewells, she watched him vanish into road haze until Brienne laid a gauntleted hand on her shoulder. "Time catches us," Brienne said quietly. "Yes." Sansa's gaze clung to the empty track. "But not our work." The midsummer festival felt lighter than any since the charter's birth. Winters had been mild, stores brimmed. Across the north, cooperatives flushed with surplus contributed to an ambitious plan. A public archive carved into the hillside beneath Winterfell, protecting knowledge from fire and war. Architects visited from Qohor to advise bracing vaults. Stone masons laid foundation stones shaped like interlocking hands. Sansa surveyed the site daily, feeling purpose anchor her failing strength. That autumn, her legs weakened. Maester Idwal brewed tonics of willow bark and honey root, but pain slithered up spine and nested between shoulder blades. She still attended council, though Arya wheeled her chair some days. On the first frost morning, Arya found her in the Godswood at dawn, one hand pressed to the heart tree, lips moving. Arya said nothing, only offered an arm. After midday meal, she requested Rowan summon the senior scribes. To them, she dictated revisions to the charter, updates clarifying land stewardship in light of new irrigation patterns, amendments guaranteeing legal counsel for every citizen in tribunal cases, a clause establishing councils of craft elders to advise on apprenticeships. Her voice wore thin, but each sentence fell sure. When the candle burned low, Brienne entered carrying parchment, rolled like a scroll. A new map, painted by the Female Cartographers Guild of Lannisport. Mountains shaded in crushed lapis, rivers in indigo, farmland tinted ochre. Brienne unfurled it across the desk. The boldest feature was not terrain, but dotted lines of trade and learning. A purple thread linking Winterfell to Sunspear, where spice caravans now traveled unmolested. A copper spiral marking the itineraries of the Free Mercy Corps, providing famine relief in Tyrosh. A bright silver arc denoting scholarship exchange with the Citadel, the once cloistered order that now admitted pupils irrespective of birth. Sansa traced those lines with a finger that trembled. "Tell the guild," she whispered. "I approve its printing." "She will," Brienne promised. But Sansa noticed the misplaced pronoun and smiled. She'd seen the subtle change in the last year. Brienne's once emphatic "we" had become gentle third person, as though separating Sansa's deeds from Sansa herself, honoring both while anticipating their parting. 2 mornings later, across the courtyard, she watched mere children practicing the signature salute of hand to heart, laughing as they mistimed the motion. She felt an ache deeper than any tonic could soothe, a sweet ache of farewell. That evening she asked Arya to walk with her to the crypts. They descended by lantern, torches sputtering against damp stone. Faces of ancestors stared from shadows. Some names Sansa barely remembered, others carved into her bones. At Eddard Stark's statue, she paused, touched cold marble cheek. "I used to think I dishonored him," she said. Arya's lantern cast flickers across the stone's stoic features. "Why?" "For taking the throne I once dreamed of, and then breaking it." She let her hand drop. "But he cut ice for justice, not to wear as a crown. Maybe I honored that." Arya tilted her head. "You did." They moved deeper to the newer alcove where Robb Sinotif rested. No body had ever been returned from the Red Wedding, yet craftsmen sculpted wolf and crown as though bone remained beneath. Sansa's breath caught. She laid 2 fingers on the direwolf's snout, closed her eyes, whispered a line of the ballad Podrick had played. Winter's cry carried by a sister's will. When she opened eyes, Arya was watching. Something unreadable there. "I will ride east again soon," Arya said. "There are shores I—" "Go." Sansa cut gently, knowing Arya feared chains of any kind. "Carry the charter where you roam. Write me of curling waves and cities that float." Arya swallowed. If you need me, I will always need you," Sansa said. "But not always at my side." They clasped forearms. Arya's was strong, wiry, Sansa's thin but unbroken. That night, north wind keened across Winterfell's merlons. Sansa slept lightly, waking once to gaze from her chamber at pale curtains of aurora. Color danced like living silk, green, pink, phantom gold. She watched until lids drooped. Before dawn bell, Brienne entered softly, but Sansa's bed held only folded sheets, still warm. A flicker of panic seized the night. She checked the hearth, embers banked, heat lingering. She hurried toward the godswood. There, beneath the great heart tree, shuddering crimson leaves, Sansa sat on a carved stump, wrapped in her wolf fur cloak, head tilted back as if listening. Frost dusted her auburn hair. Her eyes were closed. The faintest smile touched her lips, as though the tree had whispered final secret. Brienne's breath puffed in cold air. She knelt and touched Sansa's wrist. Still, silent. The night lowered her head, tears coursing down weather-worn cheeks. She remained kneeling until footsteps approached. Rowan in council cloak, Arya with sword across back, Maester Idwal clutching a rolled fleece. They took in the sight, and none spoke a while, the only sound wind stirring leaves. At last Arya crouched, brushed hair from Sansa's brow. "She went like a Stark," she murmured. Rowan cleared his throat. "We should—" "Yes," Brienne whispered. She rose, towering, wiped tears roughly, but carefully. They bore Sansa through keep corridors in reverent hush. Word spread swift as dawn. The queen who gave away her crown had slipped into legend. Bells tolled not dirges but steady chimes. 9 measured strokes, one for each house dissolved, then one more to mark the future unnumbered. In the great hall, people gathered in plain dress. No emblems flew, only a white banner bearing the open book over hammers, dipped in black ribbon. Children scattered wolf's-eye blue petals along the bier's route. For 3 days, mourners arrived, trappers from the Wolfswood, iron miners from Flint Cliffs, maesters in simple gray, sailors whose ships sailed without fear of press gangs. They filed past the bier laid in the solar where Sansa had once penned the charter. Each left token, sheaves of barley, hand-thrown mugs, a page of arithmetic scribbled by a 9-year-old student. Brienne stood watch the whole while, armor polished, sorrow carefully leashed. On the 4th sunrise, as dawn-tinged sky rose, they bore Sansa beyond the broken marker. She once camped near. In clearing ringed by young birches they raised a mound, not as queen or lady but as first citizen. Beneath wolf-carved stone they interred the fur cloak, the silver quill that drafted the charter, and a single direwolf figurine Jon had carved in childhood, found in the crypt dust long after he vanished beyond the wall. Arya placed her favorite blade, needle, across the top, then at last changed her mind, reclaimed it. Sansa would have understood practicality. When earth lay smoothed, Rowan read aloud from the updated charter. The realm is naught but the hands that tend it, and each hand worth any throne. Voices murmured assent. Brienne offered a final salute. Sword to sky, pommel to heart, then drove the blade into soil beside the stone, leaving it upright as sentinel. That evening torches lined the walls while minstrels played the ballad Podrick had carried overseas. People sang, some off-key, some weeping, some smiling. Arya watched from a parapet, face unreadable. Brienne, seated on the battlements, whispered the chorus in hoarse baritone. And somewhere far south, aboard a Lyseni brig slicing cerulean seas, Podrick Payne inhaled salt air, tipped his head, and for a moment felt as though a distant chord vibrated inside his ribs. Decades folded like sheaves. The archive Sansa dreamed bloomed into walled galleries carved beneath Winterfell, its scriptoriums lit by dragon-glass lanterns. Farmers from the Dornish marches traveled weeks to consult irrigation patterns etched on its walls. Across the realm, civic circles evolved into regional assemblies, rotating delegates every 5 years. Former sigils became festival symbols divorced from rank, lions cavorting with krakens on midsummer banners because children liked their shapes. Travelers whispered still of the queen who ended houses. Some called her saint, others tyrant turned benefactor, but most simply, Sansa the seed-bearer. At her mound birches thrived, tall, stiff leaves fluttering silver. Each spring, pilgrims replanted seedlings elsewhere. On ruined keeps, roadside inns, riverbanks. Birch stands spread across Westeros in dappled groves, silent testaments that roots, once given room, cracked any ancient stone. One crisp spring bullock driver guiding his cart south from the neck halted under such a birch grove. A lad rode with him, bright-eyed, reading from a freshly printed primer. The boy's voice stumbled on longer words. "What's that talk of a charter?" the driver asked, wiping brow. "The book says," the boy replied. "Sansa made a paper so big, nobody's shadow fell on anybody else ever again." The driver chuckled low. "Seems fancy." The boy held up the primer. "Teacher says where any of us walks, we carry a corner of that paper." He tapped his own chest. "Right in here." They rode on. Behind them, wind stirred birch leaves, sibilant like pages turning. Far in the east, on a marble veranda overlooking harbors crammed with bright sails, an aging Podrick Payne, envoy no longer but elder statesman, sat beside a Lyseni philosopher debating distributive justice. He glanced west, where dusk painted sky violet, and for a heartbeat imagined he saw a streak of aurora born somehow across half a world. He smiled, set lute to knee, and played the first notes of a ballad that had once woken a kingdom before it ever slept. In the sound of strings, in the hush of scholars poring over maps, in the laughter of village children, scampering beneath birch branches, the legacy of a girl who survived cruelty, of a woman who dissolved crowns with parchment and iron will, nourished the marrow of a realm endlessly becoming. And though histories would embroider triumph and failure, exaggerate dust into gold and gold into dust, one truth endured beyond all telling. Freedom flourished not in the absence of power, but in its seed passing into every waiting hand, leafing bright and stubborn wherever soil hungered for spring. Ocean winds braided the scents of salt, tar, and apricot wine across the blue slate quays of Lys, while Podrick Payne paced the length of the marble veranda outside the star-sown hall. Dawn pearled the bay, and the 1,000 glass lanterns along the palace balustrades guttered out one by one like an exhausted constellation. Behind him, somewhere in the domed council chamber, 27 envoys from a dozen realms argued in lilting accents over the language of a treaty meant to change a world that did not yet believe in change. Podrick tamped down nerves by rehearsing Sansa's last piece of counsel. Speak softly. Name the fear. Hand them the tool to bury it, until the words beat time with his footsteps. He had crossed half the known sea to reach this dais, and still his pulse drummed Winterfell's snow-slow rhythm against his throat. He leaned on the marble balustrade and gazed toward the roadstead where tall ships nodded at anchor. Painted eyes stared from their prows. A Pentoshi cog with lilies on its sails, a Corthine ivory-prowed galley, a squat battered caravel wearing the green wolf of the Free Mercy Corps. They bobbed side by side without challenge, something that would have seemed a fever dream back when he carried Brienne's extra sword and prayed not to die before his voice properly broke. He smiled at the thought, then stilled as footsteps clicked behind him. The Lyseni delegate, Magister Valos Ormelio, stepped onto the veranda, robes of seafoam silk rippling about him. He had eyes like cut glass and a mouth that twitched whenever the charter's clauses on debt relief surfaced. Master Payne, he said, each consonant polished. You stand alone while the other envoys gnaw their positions to gristle. Podrick inclined his head. Sometimes the best way to measure a room is from the outside. Ormelio's thin brow rose. Or the best way to pretend walls are thinner than they are. He drifted to the rail. Your late queen's legacy glows bright in distant halls, but Lys is not Westeros. We thrive on unequal bargains. Ask any perfumer, any pillowhouse proprietor, any priest who sells absolution by the drop. You propose to sand the edges of profit. Some stains do not scrub. No. The charter was never a scrub brush, Podrick replied. It's a loom. We weave ourselves into it, or we unravel alone. Ormelio's smile cut sideways. Poetry is dear, but coin dearer. Tell me if a guild of Lyseni shipwrights cannot charge triple wages to Volantine buyers. Who builds our fleets? Your own children, Podrick said. Ormelio blinked. The answer lacked the clever misdirection he expected. Podrick pressed. Lys built its fleets on hired hands chasing myths of island luxury. Dutchery. Pay your born citizens fairly, educate them, shorten their oar, and they'll craft better keels than any indentured Volantine running from plague. You keep skill and silver in the alleyways that need them. You shorten the Gulf bandits sail through. Now. Ormelio studied him, irises reflecting dawn glaze. And what if nobles cling to lineage advantages? Then they risk sinking with rotted deck planks they refuse to replace. Podrick exhaled fog. We offer a map, Magister, not a chain. From the council hall behind them erupted a rumble of raised voices as the Astapori envoy sneered at Braavosi banking customs. Podrick straightened. Shall we go in? Later, Ormelio said, gaze returning to the anchored ships. You carry a dead woman's fire in your eyes. Guard it. This city gusts strong. He slipped back through the gold filigreed doors, leaving Podrick alone with gulls circling the masts like commas around an unfinished sentence. Hours later, the assemblage reconvened under vaulted ceilings inlaid with lapis. Podrick stood at the long semicircular table, palms flat, voice level. He spoke of barn swallows, how they nested under Winterfell's eaves, because the smithy's heat warmed early eggs, how the first charter had protected that smithy from seizure by a greedy thane, and how 15 seasons on the Swallows still wove nests there, scattering insects that once devoured barley shoots. He described merchants of White Harbor who discovered profit in health, funding midwives because healthy mothers lived to knit stronger nets, cast wider roots, pay taxes that pave better roads. Then he spoke of Sansa Stark, dying under a heart tree, older than courts and thrones, and how her silence had not stilled the wind, because the wind now blew from thousands of mouths. He ended by laying a single birch leaf beside his notes, silver on one side, green on the other. Silence vaulted higher than any ceiling. The magisters of Lys, the sea lords, whisper thin proxy, the leather-clad envoy from the Shadowlands. None risked the mockery of applause, yet something shifted like a keel, sliding into water. Arguments resumed, but they bent in new channels. Tariffs tied to crop yield indexes, debt bonds converted to labor guild scholarships, a clause requiring any city that accepted the charter's protections to fund one hospital ship every 5 years. Quills scratched until dusk. When the last torches flared low, Ormelio himself moved that the assembly present a provisional accord at dawn. No one objected. That night Podrick lay on a silk mattress softer than any featherbed at Winterfell, and could not sleep. He missed Brienne's faint snores down the corridor, missed Arya's sardonic grin at dawn, missed the smoke and pine smell of the castle yard. He rose, pulled robe and sandals, and walked the veranda again. Stars glittered on black water. Wavelets clinked against hulls. Somewhere a low whistle rose, workmen unloading spice casks by lamplight. The ordinary music of a city, still bent on commerce, but now perhaps humming a different key. When sun breached the horizon, the accord lay signed by every envoy save one, the mercantile prince from Quarth, who excused himself on grounds of consultation with the 13. Podrick pinned no hopes there. Quarthine politics were riddling boxes inside boxes. He accepted the charter scroll bound in indigo ribbon, sealed with wax carrying 10 diverse sigils, then stepped down the marble stair into a throng of reporters, scribes, and curious sailors lining the quay. Some cheered, some jeered, but most simply watched as if waiting for thunder. A Lyseni boy no older than 10 pushed through and thrust a vial toward Podrick, a simple glass ampule holding 3 grains of sand. "From the beach where fishers will build their own boats," the boy said in thick accent. Podrick tucked the vial into his sleeve, feeling its light rattle near his pulse, and realized that even if the accord crumbled tomorrow, those 3 grains might seed a fleet of honest sails. Weeks later, weather-thrashed, half-sunburned, Podrick stepped onto Winterfell's courtyard flagstones. Brienne hugged him so fiercely his ribs creaked. Arya ruffled his hair, then pretended she had not. Rowan, older, stouter, read the accord line by line before the full council, voice trembling when he reached the clause on hospital ships, "For every harbor must beckon mercy." In the hall's far corner, a scribe sucked breath, then started clapping. The sound spread like wildfire, echoing off timbers that once moaned under siege. After congratulations sifted away, Brienne and Podrick walked the battlements, where you could still glimpse Sansa's birch grove, beyond the outer wall. Podrick told Brienne about the boy with the sand. She listened, lips curved, eyes flicking to the horizon. "It isn't over," she said. He laughed. Of course it wasn't. They were only chapters in a story that sprouted new authors daily. While Winterfell celebrated, trouble slithered beneath calmer waters. In Old Volantis, a cabal of Triarch heirs bristled at the accord that threatened their slave ships' margins. They found allies among the last ragged few of the Tyrell Pretender's fleet, who nursed revenge nightmares in Myrish wine cellars. Coin traded hands. Crossbowmen hired. Maps copied. The conspirators planned to strike a symbol, not an army, burn the birch grove, shatter Sansa's mound, film the ashes for every discontent to savor. History had taught them that one broken monument could grind a generation's faith into powder. They sailed under false flags, Mercian clippers disguised as olive haulers, and slipped past White Harbor on a moonless night. But the world had changed beneath their boots. 3 sea leagues north, a volunteer watchtower crew, half made of former Lysini deckhands now paid honest wages, spotted the dark-sailed shapes. A signal fire roared. Ravens burst into night sky, notes pinned to legs with alarms in plain street tongue. Intruders on the shivering coast? Stay alert. Organized defense. Speak before swords. Villagers at Stony Shore gathered by torchlight on the beach, where snow met surf. They formed two semicircles, women and men at front, nets in hand, spears across shoulders. Behind them a row of scrawny yearling birches shook in salt wind, the westernmost exile seedlings from Sansa's grove. Children peeked from fur-lined hoods, clutching wooden rattles carved like open books. A surf-beaten old woman stepped forward, her stick tracing runes in wet sand as the ship's prows at last scraped shingle. 30 Sellswards leapt onto the shore, blades naked. Their captain, a gaunt man wearing a gilded lily ring, raised torch and pointed at the saplings. "Those trees fall first," he ordered. The old woman slammed her stick once into sand. "You want axes? Buy them. You want lumber? Pay with coin or labor." Her voice cracked yet carried. "You want to burn? No, you'll have to torch us too." And fire spreads. The gaunt captain sneered. "Step aside or drown in your own brine." A youth beside the crone lifted the linen cover off a small cast-iron kettle slung by rope. He thrust it above his head. Embers glowed inside. "Pitch and dry moss," he announced. "We hurl, you burn as bright as any stake." For a thudding heartbeat, only sea hissed on pebbles. The Sellswards stirred uncertainly. Their pay bought eagerness for loot, not death on a nameless strand. Behind them, torches wavered. On ship decks, figures muttered. No reinforcements. No guarantee. One sword clattered onto shingle. Another followed. The gaunt man cursed as his line dissolved into half-hearted snarls and retreat. Villagers watched the intruders scramble back aboard, rowboats jostling in surf. When the dark sails faded, they doused torches and built a bonfire to warm the children until dawn. By raven and rumor, the story reached Winterfell before the conspirators limped into Mare. Rowan read the account aloud. Laughter and applause shook council benches. But Arya's smile was thin. "We clipped a fingernail," she said. "Not the claw." She proposed infiltrating Volantis to expose the Cobble's coin trail. Brienne frowned, predicting traps. Podrick argued that public stories disarmed fear faster than blades. Rowan urged patience. Winter's road churned mud. Harvest needed hands. They debated late into night. In the small hours, Arya slipped away with only needle and a pouch of Bravosi coins. Brienne, discovering the empty bunk, cursed in 3 languages, then returned to the council to tighten defense webs along every coast. Podrick wrote letters to Lys, Bravos Pentos relaying the plot, urging joint patrols. For the first time, foreign patrols cooperated. A Lyseni cutter, a Bravosi trireme, and a northern caravel sailed side by side, exchanging casks of brine-pickled cod and coated lantern flashes. In Volantis, Arya resurfaced weeks later, under a weaver's guise. She stalked markets where Triarch nephews gambled away slaves' freedom across dice. She shadowed courtyards where masked heirs whispered about the tree torch that never sparked. One night in the Orange Lantern district, she cornered a scribe who kept ledgers of bribes and extracted names, ports, schedules. By dawn, the scribe lay tied outside the Elephant Gate with a scroll nailed to his tunic. "Your past is carved in your shadow, but morning light burns silhouettes away." The ledger, copied thrice, sped north by sea-swift pigeon. One copy reached Brienne's gauntlets. Another delivered to Lysburd Magister Ormelio to freeze several accounts. The third, dropped in Bravos, triggered the Iron Bank to revoke letters of credit. Without coin, the cabal starved. A final wild attempt to hire Carthene corsairs fizzled when the corsairs realized the charter-backed hospital ships carried more goodwill than ransom. Arya returned in mid-autumn, gaunter, hair hacked short, 2 new white scars down her left forearm. She traded silent nods with Brienne and embraced Podrick like a sister returned from war. They gathered at Sansa's grove under birches blowing gold. Rowan was there, reading fresh petitions, requests for irrigation grants in the Reach, a proposal for cross-realm apprenticeships in glassblowing. Podrick strummed his lute for children chasing leaves. Brienne leaned on a shovel, having planted another sapling at the mound's edge to honor those villagers of Stony Shore. Arya watched, expression unreadable, then crouched at Sansa's stone and whispered, "Still sewing us together, big sister," before standing to join the song. Winter that year arrived early and fierce. Ice glazed even the hot springs' rills. Supply lines strained. The Free Mercy Corps hospital ships, now 5 strong, braved squalls to ferry barley and salted eel. In the Vale, avalanches cut roads. Miners tunneled emergency passages, guided by diagrams printed from the Winterfell archive. Every crisis turned into exercise in collective grit. And while not all ended without loss, sorrow shared wove thicker cloth. Podrick fell ill with lung fever. Brienne sat at his bedside reading him Lyseni sea shanties until color returned. When he could breathe full again, he joked that her clanging singing voice must have scared death off. She cuffed him gently. The Triarch heirs of Volantis were brought before a tribunal not of lords but of mixed guild representatives. They were offered leniency if they publicly endorsed the charter and funded a free school for dockworkers' children. Most accepted. A few chose exile. The school opened the following spring beneath a canopy of flowering orange trees. 5 years slid by. The Charter Alliance, folk called it the Lantern Union, held Congress every 2 summers, each hosted by a different realm. Sailors painted new insignia on hulls, an open book crossed by hammer and quill. The emblem began to appear on clay jars of Dornish wine, on braids of Bravosi bread, on timber stamped for export from the neck. It did not replace merchant marks. It merely promised a standard of fairness. Living wage, clean keel, safe deck. Consumers paid a copper more by choice. Profit adjusted, not collapsed. The world's spine flexed into new posture. In the midst of these grand shifts, small stories bloomed that would never grace chronicles. A one-armed potter in Fair Isle opened a reading room after a charter grant taught him letters. A Gothboni farmer in the Summer Islands invented a water screw from diagrams shared by the Lyseni Engineers Guild. Tourney bards discovered crowds cheered louder for epics of civic valor than for ballads of lone kings draped in rotting glory. One late summer morning Brienne awoke to aching knees prophesying rain. She armed herself slowly, then descended to the training yard where she now taught 36 recruits at once. The youngest, a boy no bigger than she'd been at Podrick's age, lifted a practice shield trimmed in green wolf. Brienne corrected his angle, saw in his eyes not hunger for battlefield songs but fierce desire to stand between his village and harm. She recognized that steel. She'd carried it since Renly's camp. After drills, she crossed the bridge to the archive's main rotunda, where sunlight slanted through stained glass panes, depicting a birch branch. Inside, Podrick leaned on a lectern, reading to 3 scribes, the final edits to Sail Under Kind Winds, his memoir of the Lys Accord. He paused, saw her, offered lopsided grin. She nodded at the pages. "Worth the ink?" He shrugged. Sailors like to know storms end. They lapsed into companionable silence. She studied the dome overhead, thinking how once she believed heroism meant charging all enemies with one sword. Now heroism sometimes meant proofreading a clause that ensured widows kept their homesteads. She liked that. News arrived then that Korth at last had ratified the accord after a delegation of small-scale ivory carvers threatened to blockade the custom house if the 13 delayed again. Brienne laughed so loudly her voice rang between marble pillars. Yet not every corner of Westeros or beyond hummed harmonious. In the hills of the Red Mountains, a prophet calling himself the True Flame preached that the charter choked the warrior spirit of men. He rallied flocks with promises of forgotten glory, anointed himself with wildfire, and led raids on grain convoys. The council debated, sending militia. Arya, restless, said she would go alone to trim the flame's wick. Brienne argued this fanatic needed witness, not execution. Podrick suggested a wagon train of musicians, storytellers, and medics flood the valley with the life he claims is fading. Rowan dispatched both solutions, Arya scouting ahead, the caravan trundling 2 days behind. The valley showdown unfolded not in blood, but in thunder of drums and riot of lanterns. Musicians played into the night. Medics treated the true flame's own wounded followers. Children who'd never tasted honey before received combs from beekeeper guilds. The prophet stood on a rise, green fire flickering on his palms, but at dawn, less than a dozen zealots remained. He hurled curses. Arya flicked sand in his eyes and tied him for trial. The valley farmers, seeing more value in song than in myth, chose restitution over gallows. They set the prophet to rebuilding the grain store he had torched. Later, Arya told Brienne that victory tasted like blackberry jam served by an old huntress who swore she'd never trust strangers again until strangers arrived with loots and bandages. Seasons cycled. Children born the day. Sansa died were now adolescents learning 3 tongues in public institutes. Their teachers assigned essays. Why do we honor seed more than banner? Answers varied, some poetic, some clumsy, but all carried seeds themselves. Podrick, hair silvering, took to walking the birch grove each dusk. One evening, he found a girl perhaps 9 leaning against Sansa's stone, scribbling. She straightened as he approached, cheeks flushing. "I'm finishing my story," she said. "What story is that?" "About the night the trees almost burned," she replied. She squinted, as if gauging his age. "Were you alive then?" He laughed. "Very much alive, and lucky I remain so." She studied him. "Is it true no one ordered those villagers to stand?" "It's true," he said. "Some truths bloom by themselves." She bit her lip, then extended the parchment. "Will you read?" He did, tracing lines of deliberately neat script. How fear narrowed to a single strand of choice. How ordinary voices grew muscled. How the cells words left their torches in sea foam. The story ended with a vow to plant more birches so that the wind could carry leaves like letters. He handed it back. "I'd sign my name to that," he told her. She beamed. Days after harvest feast, Rowan Snow fell ill and did not recover. At his funeral, in the archive courtyard, delegates from a dozen realms spoke of his calm and cyclone halls. Podrick was elected speaker by acclaim, though he protested age. "Leadership," Brienne teased, "is like northern stew, better after long simmer." He accepted, stipulating his first act be to mentor a council of youth scribes who would share the post in rotation. Brienne herself resigned captaincy of the watch, passing the wolf-helm to Maria Holt, the same girl who once lost balance under a wooden sword. Maria's first decree required all recruits study forestry as well as swordcraft, for defense without renewal is axe without whetstone. Many grumbled until she led them through a month-long replanting mission along the shivering coast. They returned leaner, quieter, calling her captain sapling behind her back, affectionate, not mocking. At last, even Arya seemed ready to rest. She purchased a small cottage a mile beyond Wintertown, its porch facing sunset over barley fields. She still roamed, but always returned by first snowfall, telling tales to wide-eyed tavern patrons of elephants in jungles west of Sotherios, or glass deserts south of Yee. They thought half of it lies, half miracle. She thought both halves freedom. One night she sat on her porch, needle balanced across knees, as Podrick climbed the path. He carried a ledger under one arm, 2 mugs of mulled cider in the other. They drank, watching dusk bruise the clouds. "Do you think Sansa foresaw this?" she asked. "No," he replied after a moment. "I think she just trusted soil." Arya chuckled. Would have annoyed her all this praise. "And pleased her," Podrick added, "that the praise doesn't need her anymore." They listened to crickets. Far away a watch horn hooted. A call and answer with no threat. Just nightly roll. Arya traced a crack in the mud glaze. "We keep building walls," she said, "but now out of people's hands instead of stone." Podrick lifted his cup. "To hands, then." Decades rolled on. Podrick passed quietly in his sleep at age 74, quill still clutched. His ashes scattered beneath the birch grove, mingling with Sansa's roots. Brienne, older yet, died 2 winters later, defending a caravan from a freak spate flood, shield braced, boots planted, holding the line so wagons could cross. They found her smiling in the shallows, water sluicing around her like silver ribbons. Arya lived longest. She outlasted new calendars, watched airships float over sunset coastlines, wrote treatises on mapeless islands. In her 93rd year, she returned to Winterfell one final time, walking slower but eyes bright as dawn swords. She asked Maria, now gray herself, to guide her to the crypts. There she knelt before Sansa's statue newly carved in living birch. Trunk smoothed into calm visage, branches arching overhead, leaves muttering perpetual lullaby. Arya pressed wrinkled palm to the wood. Well, little sister, she murmured, we kept the candle lit. Wind rustled, scattering a cascade of golden leaves around her ankles. She gathered one, tucked it behind her ear, and rose to leave the hall. Outside, children chased each other between trunk-thick roots, their laughter a language older than war. Arya watched them, a fine sting behind her eyes. Then she turned toward the western gate, where a caravan waited for its guide to places uncharted. Needle no longer hung at her hip. She had left it on Sansa's mound, point driven into earth, hilt wrapped in a ribbon bearing the charter's emblem. Blades could rest now. Maps needed feet, not steel. She stepped beyond the arch into brittle sunlight, and though her gait was slow, her shadow stretched ahead, long, lean, impossible, until it vanished into the road's shimmer, where every traveler becomes a new line in the same unfinished story, and every footfall drums the quiet promise penned once in ash and winter ink: freedom, seeded, will outgrow us all. Clouds combed across the sky in slow silver skeins as the caravan wound north along the banks of the Stillwater. Wagon wheels whispered over crushed shell and packed chalk, and the canvas hoods bellied with each breeze that smelled faintly of peat and distant rain. None of the children walking beside the lead wagon realized that the frail-looking woman in the plain brown cloak, a birch leaf tucked behind her ear, was the last living daughter of Eddard and Catelyn Stark. They only knew her as Old Nanara, the guide who told stories at night and could still fix a jammed wheel with a whittling knife and a strip of boiled hide. She listened to them chatter about the harvest fete in Shadowmoor and smiled without turning. Her footfalls were light, shuffling perhaps, but steady. At 93, everything in her body seemed to remember how to move, even when her mind drifted to places leagues away. Braavos rooftops slippery with evening dew, the thunder of hooves outside Harrenhal, the tang of salt on Sothurian winds. She had thought she was done with roads after Podrick's funeral. But then the invitation came. A conclave at the Archive of Rivers, newly built where the Trident split, calling field scribes, map-makers, and any wanderer who has set eyes on what lies past the margins of our oldest charts. At first, she almost sent regrets. Her bones ached, winter crept sooner each year, and no piece of parchment would live longer than the songs already resting in her head. But one dawn she dreamed of Sansa's face, young, unbowed, telling Arya that choice was a sword that grew sharper each time someone dared draw it. She woke, rose, and began to pack. 3 wagons in all made the journey. A tinker's rig loaded with brass pots and glass flasks. A rolling kitchen, where 2 sisters baked barley cakes over a sandbed stove, and the library wagon that carried bound copies of the charter, translated into Kiskari glyphs, Summer tongue, and a new alphabet developed for the mute sign guilds of Dorne. The drivers were modest folk, none beyond 30, and they treated their passenger with a mixture of practical deference and affectionate exasperation whenever she insisted on taking her turn at the reins. On the 14th morning, mist sheeted low over the marshy flats. Heron culls stitched the quiet, and droplets trembled on spiderwebs strung across reed shafts. Arya? She never gave another name, though they guessed. Woke first, unlashed the tarpaulin, and padded down to the water. She knelt, cupped a thin skim of river in her palm, and drank. Every joint complained, but the taste of silt and green water brightened her eyes. She thought how many rivers she had seen and how each left a different grit on her tongue, like thumbprints of the kingdoms they fed. She scooped a second palmful and spilled it onto the earth at her feet. A small rite, for friends who could no longer drink. Boot scrapes behind her, announced the tinker. Clever Jack, lanky and flax-haired, whose knuckles perpetually bore tiny solder burns. The younger ones caught a carp, he said. Big as my arm. They want you to name it. Name your own fish, she rasped, and Jack laughed, undeterred. They broke camp beneath pale sun. The children, Larima, Pell and Davin, walked ahead, balancing poles across their shoulders. They sang a counting rhyme that Arya recognized, but half the words had changed. What once warned of ghosts and broken crowns now told of milgears and harvest moons. She filed that away to mention at the conclave. Rhymes changed faster than laws, and sometimes laws followed the rhymes. By midday they reached a low ridge of tumbled boulders where purple asters nodded between cracks. The track forked, south toward River Run's old causeway, east toward the unfinished alchemist's wind farm that captured autumn gales. Arya chose the east road. The others trusted her sense. All afternoon, the horizon widened. Hard blue sky, meeting tawny grassland speckled by waterflash from irrigation canals. Toward dusk they spotted another caravan hugging the rim of a shallow vale, black banners displaying crossed quills. The Free Mercy Corps, likely hauling surgical tables and winter quilts upriver. When the two lines met at a switchback, drivers swapped news and plums, and Mercy's surgeon recognized Arya by the gray flecks in her eyes. She waved him silent before he could bow. We're all just keeping wagons moving, she said, and he accepted that, handing over a tin of mint salve for her knees. That night, the two caravans camped together. Fires dotted the meadow, and someone strummed a two-string lyre while stew bubbled thick with root vegetables. Children practiced writing the new mute glyphs with sticks in the dirt. Arya leaned against a log, blanket around her shoulders, observing how easily these folks slipped into tasks once assigned by fear or coin. Now they did them for mutual ease. She wondered what Ned would have made of this. She pictured him crouched by one of the pots, tasting broth, offering a quiet good that meant more than any lord's decree. Near midnight, while most slept, Arya sat with the Mercy surgeon, Malden of Lys, exchanging path tales. He spoke of plague suppression upriver, beaver caravans arriving with charters in 7 tongues, mothers weeping at the taste of clean water. Arya told of the Jade Sea's glassy calm, where she once chased a pirate who claimed to be the last Valyrian prince. She spared him after he wept over a kitten. Malden laughed softly. Your stories are unbelievable, he said, yet truer than most. She shrugged. Truth widens the more you walk. The next morning they parted west and east. Arya's company rolled into rolling farmlands where windmills churned like lazy giants. Fallow strips shimmered with clover, meant to feed soil rather than mouths. New wisdom from guild agronomists. Beyond, a cluster of spires rose, the archive of rivers built where 3 waterways joined. Its outer ring was brick, inner keep of limestone, and above all towered a framework of iron lattice supporting panes of river glass that captured sunlight and funneled warmth into subterranean reading vaults. At the gate, a young bailiff approached with a ledger. He squinted at Arya's travel-worn cloak and asked her trade. I walk, she answered. He tilted his head. She added, Maps remember my footprints. That sufficed. He entered a hash mark. Inside the courtyard, dozens of tents dotted the lawn. Scholars hammered stakes. Scribes unloaded crates labeled Arcane Flora, handled gently. Sailors in salt-stiff coats rolled charts. A delegation from Korth unfurled a silk banner depicting a stylized compass rose. The Valemen strung colored rope between pavilions as makeshift gallery space. The air buzzed like a hive. Arya's knees threatened revolt, but curiosity spurred her on. She paused at a booth where a Yiddish cartographer displayed a palm-sized globe carved of soapstone. Tiny lenses inserted in the axis allowed a viewer to study micro-etchings of each coastline. Arya peered through one lens and saw the painted mountains rendered in minuscule ravines. She complimented the precision. The cartographer bowed and pressed a sliver of smoked shark leather into her palm. For grip, he said, nodding at Needle's absence as though he knew its story. She registered for the conclave under the name Arya of Wintertown. The registrar, a bespectacled girl with ink on her cheek, recognized nothing significant in the surname. That pleased Arya. She found a patch of shade between an apple sapling and a stack of water barrels and set her bedroll. Next to her, clever Jack meticulously unpacked his wares. She watched him arrange brass tubes that screwed into a collapsible cooking range. "It can bake bread even in a snow squall," he boasted. Arya suggested he demonstrate at dusk. Scholars, she said, would kill for warm crust. Opening ceremonies spilled into twilight around a crescent of fire baskets. Voices from every shore rose. Dothraki herders petitioned for river rights. A blind skald from the Iron Islands recited a cadence about fated krakens and fresh nets. A Summer Island mathematician presented a board etched with interlocking spirals, representing wind patterns that could predict storms 3 days ahead. Arya listened, occasionally closing her eyes to let the world imprint by sound. Then a hush swept the lawn when a parchment-skinned maester stepped onto the plank dais. He held aloft a shard of black stone, dragon glass polished to a mirror. "This," he said, voice thin yet steeped in wonder, "was dredged from the shivering coast after a slide drew half a cliff into the sea. Embedded within we found bones, clearly fish yet lined with tiny canals, implying advanced vascular systems, evidence of creatures older than our oldest legends, a gift from the layers beneath our feet, reminding us that time, too, is a river with buried courses." He placed the fragment on a cloth, and torchlight danced in its facets. The crowd murmured. Arya saw rapture in young faces, discovery sparking like flint. She remembered Sansa's funeral night when Podrick sang, and children giggled under birches. That same ember glowed here. This urge to know the unknown, not for conquest, but for kinship. After speeches, stew and Jack's piping hot bread circulated. Arya ate on a low stool, ankles crossed, scanning the gatherers. She spotted a slender woman wearing a cloak trimmed with bright green thread. Too fine for a common traveler. The woman carried herself with guarded grace, a blade's length hidden in each gesture. Document runner, Arya guessed. Or maybe envoy. She caught Arya's eye, offered a nod that indicated recognition of some unspoken membership. Later, Arya slipped away from flickering lamplight, weaving toward the riverbank. She followed the soft rush of water until tents blurred behind scrub willows. Stars reflected crisp on the current. She crouched, skimming fingertips across the surface, feeling the river pulse. Every river she'd crossed bore voices if one listened. Stories of snowmelt, fish migration, broken oaths, mended nets. She thought of Bran, somewhere beyond the neck, perhaps listening even deeper. Footsteps crunched. The green-threaded envoy emerged, stopping 2 paces back. Arya didn't look. "You're the wolf who walked across pages then vanished," the woman said. Arya stood, joints popping. Many wolves. Which page? The rise of the Lantern Union. The siege of Tall Trees Town. The unmasking of the Volantine Cabal. All footnoted by a lone watcher whose name ink refused. The envoy stepped closer, moonlight catching her sharp nose. "Your absence left margins blank." "Margins are for new ink," Arya replied. The envoy half smiled. "I'm Jessa Troon, courier for the floating library of Kohor. We collect living witnesses." "Dan and Rouse." "I'm alive enough." Arya regarded her. "What witness do you need?" Jessa unrolled a scroll painted with swirling runes. North of Skagos Isles, fishermen reported a dark fog that swallowed 2 longboats. Survivors speak of lights inside the mist, green and white, flickering like lanterns and voices singing in a tongue older than Rhoynar. They want a field guide. "We want someone who has stood in stranger fogs." Arya tapped her thumb against the scroll. She had once trailed a Bravosi merchant into fog so thick it muffled heartbeats, and there she'd seen illusions of faces long dead. She still wasn't sure they were illusions. "Why me?" "Because you do not fear lyrics you don't understand," Jessa said. Arya considered the river, Jessa's poised stance, the archive towers blinking with lamplight. Her knees hurt, her back ached. She was tired of goodbyes. Yet the idea of green-lit fog tugged like a fishing line, hooked in her ribs. Another voyage, one more story, maybe the last. She ran her tongue along her teeth. "I'll think," she said, handing back the scroll. In the morning, conclave workshops buzzed. Arya joined a circle, charting migratory paths of swallows. She contributed a memory. Across the sunset sea, where days fell into orange haze, she'd seen swallows nesting in cliffside honeycombs larger than holdfasts. She sketched the pattern of their flight. The scribes murmured, thanked her. At midday she wandered to the healer's pavilion where herbalists traded salves. She sampled a tincture of moon willow that eased her hip joints like warm oil. She purchased 2 vials with coin from her old Bravosi purse. She tossed a 3rd coin to a boy stoking the brazier. He stared in wonder as if it were gold, though it was a simple copper minted the year Sansa died. Valuable now mostly for nostalgia. On the second night, storms boiled south. Wind drummed canvas. Delegates gathered in the reading crypts to continue sessions by lamplight. Arya sat near the door in case of fire. Habits never fully left. A Valaman argued that charting weather patterns would require centralized observatories. A Summer Islander countered that knowledge should remain decentralized, lest old tyrannies creep in. Voices heated. Arya rose and cleared her throat. The room fell still. "Wolves range far because packs listen," she said. "Not one wolf howls the same hour every night. Some keep watch, some hunt, some rest. Your observatories can share sky notes on rotating watch. If tyranny sprouts, packs move." She resumed her seat. Argument quieted to quills scratching compromise. Lightning fractured clouds at dawn. Rain slashed. Tents strained. In puddles, laughed reflections of scholars hauling trunks indoors. Arya helped a Myrish astronomer save a case of glass sextants. He thanked her by tracing constellations on her palm with raindrops, little diagrams of stars that shone year-round in the far south. She memorized them. The storm cleared by afternoon and left air smelling of iron and lilac. Jessa Troon found Arya inspecting a display of tide charts. "The fog quest still calls," she said. Arya studied Needle's absence again, empty hip as familiar now as the sword once was. "I have no blade." "Take ink," Jessa said. Words cut fog. That evening, Arya sat outside the apple tree, carving a small wooden arrowhead. Children drifted by, watching. Larima, the boldest, asked if the arrow could pierce a cloud. Arya said perhaps a dream cloud. Larima raced to tell her friends. After supper bells, Arya walked to the river again. She heard ripples slapping stone, smelled the wet rushes. She pictured Podrick's lopsided grin, Brienne's thunder laugh, Sansa's quiet steel. She wondered who would guard children if she sailed into fog and never returned. Then she remembered what Brienne once told her. "Guard is a circle, not a post. And in your fear, and the circle widens." She found Jessa by the messenger aviary. "I'll need a fast ship, a crew who trust wind more than thrones, and someone to carry my body home if mist eats me." Jessa nodded, eyes fierce. "Done," she said. "We sail in 6 days. Tide turns then." Preparations consumed daylight. Arya advised on stocking hardtack, ginger root, charcoal filters. She taught sailors a counting rhyme that counted heartbeats to judge fog thickness. They painted an open book emblem on the prow, a habit nearly every charter vessel adopted. She wrote 3 letters, one to Maria Holt, one to the head archivist at Winterfell, and a final to a name she had never used on parchment, Nymeria, Queen of the Forest. She left that one folded beneath the roots of the apple sapling. The morning of departure, the sky wore a thin gold scarf. Delegates gathered at the pier to send them off. Clever Jack pressed a foldable stove into Arya's hands. "Bread in the dark," he said. Larima attempted a salute, misremembered, and ended up waving both arms. Arya winked. The ship's lines slackened. They slid into current. River narrowed to channels flanked by silver birch stands. As towers receded, Arya felt the familiar loosening, the world untying itself from certainty. She inhaled. The captain, a shy woman named Kesh with tattoos of compass points on her cheeks, asked Arya to mark the map. Arya drew a curved line north of Skagos and placed an X. Kesh raised a brow. No man's water, she said. No man's, Arya agreed. But maybe every soul's. They reached open sea in 4 days. Swells rolled gentle. Arya spent dawns on the forecastle, charting stars. She taught crew a song in High Valyrian about swans riding storm thermals. They echoed clumsily but with heart. On the 5th night the wind died. Crew whispered of the still breath, the sea's pause before revelations. Arya felt hair on her arms rise. Fog unfurled along the horizon, pale as milk. It advanced, silent. The sailors reefed sails, dropped sea anchors. Kesh ordered lanterns lit with blue filters to keep eyes adjusted. Mist lapped against bow, swallowed stern, seeped across deck. Sound muffled. Crew exhaled clouds that hovered like ghosts. Green lights flickered within the white, distant at first, then swirling closer, pulses like heartbeat echoes. Voices drifted, half song, half wind. Arya leaned on the rail. The tongue was unlike any she knew, origins older than the children's. She traced each tone, humming beneath breath, matching pitch. The song shifted, responded, 2 notes aligning. Jessa scribbled frantic rune sketches on waxed slate. Crew clutched rail, eyes wide. Shapes glimmered. Not ships, too small, too fluid. Columns of water rising like cloaked figures, caps of sea foam for heads. They drifted parallel. One neared. Within its translucent torso glowed faint motes of light. Maybe plankton, maybe hearts. Arya held palm out. The water figure leaned. Droplets scattered across her skin, cold but tingling with some inner heat, as though each carried sparks of memory. Words formed in her mind, not heard nor seen, felt. Mirror, they seemed to say. She realized the mist was a mirror. Its smoke echoed languages of those who dared speak first. She sang one of the new Riverlands rhymes. Simple, hopeful. The water figure shimmered brighter. Fog pulsed. Abruptly the lights dimmed, shapes receded, fog thinned. A sigh rippled the sea. Then silence, clear night, stars overhead. Crew exhaled as if freed from spell. Kesh wiped sweat from her brow though air was cold. Jessa turned to Arya, voice hoarse. Did we meet ghosts? Alive things, Arya said. Maybe water remembering. She flexed fingers. Silver droplets clung like dew. They sailed onward until dawn. No sign of damage, no crew harmed. Only the deck planks bore damp footprints that evaporated at sunrise. Jessa compiled notes. Arya contributed memory. They agreed nothing like conquest happened, only conversation. On return voyage, sea storms tossed them brutally. 2 sails shredded. A mast cracked. They limped into White Harbor, under gray squall. Carpenters swarmed. Word spread of fog spirits and water songs. Skeptics scoffed, but charter scribes recorded the tale. Arya spent a fortnight in Winterfell recovering. She slept beneath birches, dreamed of Sansa smiling at water lights. She awoke, determined to attend one final Lantern Congress, not as witness but as teacher. She drafted a syllabus, listening to unknown tongues. The Congress convened in Sunspear that year, under red sandstone shadows. Arya traveled by litter, bones too stiff now for horses, and spoke to 300 delegates. She told them fear starves worlds, listening feeds them. She urged each to learn one language older than their charts, to trade swords for questions. When she finished, a hush lingered like reverence. She expected applause, but preferred the silence. After Congress, she returned north slowly, stopping in hamlets to rest. In one fishing village, a girl of 14 approached with a wooden cat carving dot. The girl said her mother claimed Arya once spared her great-grandfather's life in Bravos. Arya accepted the cat, eyes misty. At last, she reached her cottage. Leaves fell crisp. She brewed pine needle tea, sat on the porch, watched sunset bleed peach over barley stubble. She sensed weariness she could not walk off. She cleaned her boot knives, arranged journals for the archive courier. She wrote one more letter, addressed to the children of whichever tomorrow reads this, urging them to step beyond fences, slice fear with curiosity. That night, the aurora returned, ribbons green and white, like the fog's lanterns had climbed sky. Arya bundled in furs on the porch, Needle's ribbon flapping where it rested on the mound half a mile away. She whispered to unseen wolves, to water singers, to Sansa, to Pod and Brienne. She slept. At dawn, Maria Holt found her still on the chair, eyes closed, breath gone, face peaceful. In her lap lay Jessa's wax slate, the rune sketches of the Fog Song, and beneath it the wooden cat. They buried Arya beside the birch grove, rested Needle ribbon across her chest. People from every realm sent sand, seeds, seashells, tokens of places her stories had reached. A new tree was planted, a hybrid apple birch grafted by Winterfell's Hort Guild. They named it Wanderer's Gift. When spring came, it flowered white-streaked with blush red. Generations turned. The charter matured into constellations of local bylaws, some sprawled, some pruned, yet all traced roots to the same soil. Children in coastal schools sang a lullaby about river mirrors and fogfolk, believing it myth. In the archive of rivers, a docent guided visitors to a humble display. A cracked leather boot, a birch leaf pressed in resin, water-stained traveling cloak. A sign read, "The Map That Walked." Nearby, a brass stove baked bite-sized loaves for curious guests. The scent of warm bread filled the hall each afternoon. One clear night, centuries distant, two astronomers on an island observatory aimed a lens at dancing lights over the Jade Sea. Died. Their instruments translated faint electromagnetic hums into sound. Through metal horns they heard a chorus, voices singing in chords strange yet somehow familiar. The data console tagged the pattern, cross-referenced archives, and surfaced a notation recorded in the Lantern Union conclave centuries prior. Unidentified fog song, northern origin. The astronomers listened, eyes shining, and wondered what stories waited beyond that horizon. They marked their charts, started drafting a proposal for an expedition, and in doing so, took one more step into the endless widening Sansa Stark had imagined when she crushed ash between gloved fingers and decided the old world had finally run out of crowns. The night wind curled through open skylights of the observatory like pages turning. Far below, birch groves rustled along the shores of rivers, still carrying grains of mountain dust Sansa once tread. And the leaves whispered over and over the promise carried north, south, east, west, by every traveler since. Freedom seeded will outgrow us all.